In 2025, a musical horror film centered around gangster vampires, deeply infused with the cultural essence of the Mississippi Delta, instantly captivated Hollywood. Directed by emerging African-American filmmaker Ryan Coogler, the new movie Sinners might initially be perceived as merely another mainstream popcorn flick. However, as the highest-grossing original film of the past decade, it carries a profound mission: to narrate a horror story deeply rooted in truth, pain, and historical reality. This film is truly extraordinary. I believe that the way this movie uses camera shots to tell the story is so remarkable that it deserves to win the Best Cinematography Award at the next Academy Awards. As for why, I will explain it in detail in the following narrative. First, let's start from the unique aspect of the frame and space of this film, and see how it manages to make the Mississippi Delta breathe. When we talk about film composition, the first thing that comes to mind is always what is placed in the frame. However, in film photography, the definition of composition has been expanded. Composition is not just what is placed in the frame, but how the audience perceives these relationships. Therefore, focal length, depth of field, and lens distortion can all be regarded as part of the composition grammar. In other words, composition does not stop at the two-dimensional frame, but extends to the visual psychology of the audience, and the lens parameters are the way to shape this psychological space. The film's cinematographer Autumn Durald Arkapaw and director Ryan Coogler clearly stated in the early stage that the flat terrain and boundless horizon of the Delta are the important foundation of the film's narrative. Showing the vastness of that land is part of how you tell the history of the people who worked those cotton fields. That's how you make people understand how hard life was under those conditions and how far people had to travel. So ultimately, they selected Panavision System 65 Studio, System 65 high-speed cameras, plus IMAX MSM 9802 and IMAX Mark IV film cameras. This is precisely the source of the film's sense of vastness. In the current era where contemporary films frequently and even excessively employ changes in aspect ratios for novel viewing experiences, Sinners stands out as one of the few correct players in this aspect ratio game. As mentioned above, Sinners was shot with multiple focal lengths in two different aspect ratios, and the deliberate use of various formats is not merely for technical showmanship, but to manipulate the audience's emotions and influence how we perceive the characters. This visual variation in composition also reflects the film's meticulous attention to its composition design. When a scene is intended to make us feel the character's oppression and being scrutinized, a format similar to that of The Hateful Eight with an extremely wide aspect ratio and shallow depth of field is used. While when the scene needs to showcase the entire community, historical continuity, or external forces, an IMX wide aspect ratio and a deeper depth of field are employed to give the environment more weight. These are the last two battle scenes in the movie. Pay attention to where the frame of the movie changes. This flexible change also gives the movie a special viewing experience, similar to a game, where there is a sense of control and being controlled. After discussing the cameras and the changes in the frame size, we will now focus on the actual presentation effect of the final images. We will then discuss why such final images typically have a shallow depth of field and how this depth of field treatment affects the composition. In Sinner, shallow depth of field is almost ubiquitous throughout the entire film, Many viewers initially react with "beautiful," the soft focus outside and inside the characters. However, if this is merely understood as a special aesthetic style, it would overlook the extremely realistic technical and narrative motivations behind it. As mentioned earlier, compared to the ordinary 35mm film base, the 70mm film base used in the center has a significantly larger light-sensitive area. This means that to achieve the same framing range, a longer focal length must be used. For instance, in this dialogue scene, although the camera angle has been changed, the clearly defined areas are still compressed onto an extremely narrow focal plane. This is naturally a result of the technical side effect brought about by the large film format. However, as the audience can see, this depth of field effect does not cause any narrative flaws. When the storyline focuses on the elements of fear, the audience is not concerned with the elements outside the main subject, but instead fully enjoys the thrilling experience.
Hey, baby.
Don't cry.
In the history of cinema, deep focus has always been the mainstream approach, as it enables the director to simultaneously present all the scene arrangements they emphasize, allowing the relationship between the characters and the space to exist simultaneously in the frame. However, with the improvement of the optical performance of equipment, the horror story Sinners, which constantly falls into self-delusion, using the most advanced equipment and shooting with potentially up to 18K material, employs the shallow depth of field shooting technique with the most blurred background. This is actually not something surprising or counterintuitive. In terms of narrative, the story of the Sinners does not require the audience to understand spatial relationships. Instead, it requires them to lose their grasp of space. This is also the case in Oppenheimer from 2023. Everything in the environment is diluted away, making it impossible for the audience to know where the characters are. The audience watches the characters, but cannot see the world. This visual deprivation viewing state is consistent with the character's mental entrapment and blurred cognition. Even to achieve this effect, the extreme shallow depth of field and out-of-focus scattering processing of the lens-baby lens in the Sinners are allowed to be used because it perfectly creates the illusionary feeling of the characters when they are on the verge of death. Meanwhile, to offer a simple reason beyond technology and equipment, when more movies tend to be broadcast on streaming platforms such as mobile phones and tablets, appropriately using shallow depth of field not only follows the trend of vlog mobile filming, but also better aligns with the viewing intuition of the small screen audience of streaming media. There is no need to concern about the background. For an ordinary viewer, the blurring effect brought by a telephoto lens and a large aperture indeed provides a softer feeling that is incomparable to the sharp background of old movies. Ultimately, the reason why the cinematography of Sinners was able to win the Academy Award for Best Cinematography was not because of its dazzling technicality, but because it brought composition back to the core of the narrative. The shallow depth of field is not merely an aesthetic choice, but a psychological cut. The changes in focal length and frame size do not merely serve the aesthetic appeal of the picture, but are also used to control the viewing rhythm of the audience. Therefore, the Sinners used images to complete a dialectical exploration of what is freedom. This is not only the superb skill of cinematography, but also the ultimate proof of composition as the narrative language. If you are also interested in the movie The Sinners, you might as well watch the original version yourself to have a better understanding. My video presentation is now over. Thank you for watching.